Welcome, everybody. So glad you are all here with us. We are here again at the annual Write Hive Conference 2026. I am Patchree Jones. I will be your moderator for this panel, and I am so delighted to be joined by these four amazing panelists for the How to Find the Right Home for Poems and Short Stories panel. So very, very excited to jump on in. Thank you all for joining us. If you are not familiar with Write Hive is a nonprofit organization filled with wonderful, amazing volunteers, as many of our panelists are. And what it is a wonderful resource of it for all things indie publishing. Anything that you can think about, any questions, finding a community. I have found my home with Write Hive, and I really enjoy doing these conferences every single year. And so if you're ever looking for anything self-publishing, small press publishing, as we're going to talk about, for all short, forms of narrative, Write Hive is the hub for you to go to. So, welcome to the Hive, and we're so excited to meet everybody. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to start on the left side of my screen, and I'm going to just move on down, and so we will take it from there. Mari, I'm going to have you start by giving us your introduction.
Hi, I'm Ness. I'm coming to this a little bit more from the traditionally published side, but I have done some work in some social media and some fun stuff, and I'm very also eager to hear more about the indie side of publishing. So this is going to be great for me personally. I have at this point, I tried to do a count, and I frankly got bored, but I'm over 400 short stories and poems published in various locations under the name of Mari Ness. The other two names I write under have about 200 poems under them as well. I'm fairly familiar with that process of publishing in zines. I have a little bit of familiarity with using small presses to publish chapbooks, and that's really where I'm coming from here. I'm probably this year best known as a poet since one of my poems was just recently nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula Awards. But previous to that, I was a little bit more known for short fiction. And I would say that tends to be a little bit more is expertise the right word? Not really. Experience is perhaps the right word. So that might be what I'll be discussing. That's pretty much it.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Mari. Chyina?
Hi, I am Chyina Powell. I am an editor mainly, but I'm also a writer. I think that's why I keep coming back to Write Hive. I love writing. I write mainly short stories. I do have a few longer pieces out there. And actually, the first piece I ever had published was when I was 12 years old, and it was a poem. Was it good? For a 12-year-old, maybe. Uh, maybe. That's a hard maybe, but um, like I said, I'm a freelance editor. I'm also the founder of the Women of Color Writers Circle. And we recently published our first anthology, and our second one is coming out later this year. For more information, I'm always on Discord, so you can feel free to DM me. And it's this side, what is one side of the screen? I'm never really quite sure which one it is. It this one? This one. Yeah, this side of the screen. Um, and actually, I'm really excited because we have more information coming about our third one later this year too.
Exciting. Excellent. Thanks so much, Chyina. Yes, and children's poets are real poets. I mentor for Kids Magazine, and I am blown away by the stuff they submit. But yes, so glad to have you here. Right, Dawn, your turn.
Hi, my name's Dawn Vogel. I'm an author and also an editor. I have been writing for publication since 2009, so 15 years now this year. And I've got slightly less than Mari does. I've got about 200 or so of my pieces published, and that spans through short fiction and also poetry. And yeah, I have all sorts of ideas and thoughts about where to publish and how to publish. So I'll have plenty to talk about here, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dawn. And last but not least, Adria.
Hi, I'm Adria Bailton. I write science fiction, fantasy, and horror for adults and young adults. I've been published with stories as short as 165 words, and currently my longest publication is a novelette around 14,000 words. That's actually this here. If we don't count the short story and poem published by my high school anthology, which we'll just not. My first story that was published and actually, paid for, so in a more professional sense, was in 2021. So I'm a much newer published author than Marie and Don and China, it sounds like. Um, and it was also translated in Spanish, which I think sometimes looking at markets that translate is an interesting thing I hope we'll talk about. I've also had stories published in audio. I have, other than that poem in high school, have not sent any poetry out in the world, as I feel like poetry sometimes is a little bit more like personal. And so although I did once participate in like a National Poetry Month thing with a little group, and I did put those on my website, but I've not ever sent any out for like somebody else to say no to.
Yeah. Oh, well, so glad to have you here. Yes, poetry is definitely not my strong point, but I think as kids, we all have to, it's like the quintessential easiest writing assignment for most English, teachers to say, okay, we'll sit and write a poem. And I have a vision of sixth grade me thinking I was an amazing poet. And it was like this ode to the boy that I really had a huge crush on, but we could never go anywhere because he always had to go straight home after school. And I was so like taken aback. And I think I found it decades later. It was so hilarious to read it. But kind of on that vein, let me lead right in and jump into the poets of our hearts, right? I want to know from everybody, what was your journey to publishing your own poems and short stories? And why did you feel like that was the format? I'm a novelist myself, so middle grade novelist here, but I've just gotten into the realm of short stories. So what was your individual journeys and why did you select that form versus, a short form poetry, short stories versus a longer novel? So Dawn, I'm going to start with you and we're going to go the other way.
All right. So like I said, I started writing with goals of publication in 2009, and that was when I met the person who is now my husband, and he was writing short fiction, but also novels during National Novel Writing Month. But one of the things that I found was that short fiction was easier for me to do than novels. Just novels like, I was undiagnosed ADHD at the time. That might have something to do with it, but novels just seemed like such a big thing to me. And so short fiction seemed a lot easier. It also, for me, had a quicker sort of turnaround in that, when you're writing novels, you've got to find an agent, then find a publisher, then get it actually published and all that things. Whereas with short fiction, I could write a story, didn't take as long as a novel, start sending it out into the world. And I would usually hear back on stuff a lot faster. So that just sort of became my go-to for what I was writing. And then eventually I was like, oh yeah, I used to write some bad poetry when I was younger, and let's try that again. And it took me a long time to admit that I'm a poet, but at this point I'm like, yeah, no, I do both.
Excellent. Adria?
So I'm one of those irritating writers who like has been telling stories since they could speak. And so then when I learned how to write, print or whatnot, then I started printing them. So, I was the one who and I'm gonna date myself here, but on my MS-DOS, whatever program that was, typed up my little stories and like printed them out and like stapled them together, gave them to friends. So that was like my very, early journey. And then, like I said, I did in high school submit a poem and and a poem to my high school anthology, which I had actually put out of my mind until I was going through my stuff because I recently moved. So I've had to literally unpack boxes that had not been unpacked in 30 years or whatever. But in 2019 or so, I had actually taken a long time off of writing just due to various reasons that, come up in a person's life, family, education, day job, stress, depression, stuff like that. So I started writing again in 2019, and I wrote novels. I wrote like 3 novels in like 6 months, like 500,000 words or something, just outrageous. Um, may also be ADHD. So, once I decided that's what I was doing, that's what I was doing. And so in the process of refining those novels, because when you kind of do that large amount in a single draft, it takes a while to get it going. And so I took some classes from Cat Rambo and some other locations, and those focus a little bit more on short form. And so I would, in the middle of these workshops, write, really short forms. And I found that, like Dawn, writing short form, you can like polish that up and send it out, and then you hear back. And so then I just, amongst my writing and editing longer forms, would write shorter forms, just because it's something I could do in a shorter time frame and hopefully hear back a little faster than the whole drawn out novel process.
Awesome. Chyina?
Firstly, I'm loving the neurodivergent representation on this panel. But so it's funny. Of course, I feel like all of us were readers, right? And that's kind of where we start. I never wanted to, like, when I started writing, I didn't want to publish because I was one of those, this is mine, this is me, this is for me. And I honestly just didn't think that my stories were good enough that someone else would want to read them, you know? And it actually started, I think I was maybe 9 years old, 8 or 9. And I read a book, and I had never met or saw a character that was so much like me before. And so anyone's curious, the character's name is Malika Madison from Sharon Flake's The Skin I'm In, right? And so she was a dark skin, wanted to write, kind of loner in her, school and everything like that. And like I connected with this character so much. And she, like in the novel, she goes to like she publishes something with her library. They have like some sort of contest, and she thought her stories didn't matter too, but she kind of came into herself. And so I was like, well, maybe I can try. And somehow it worked out uh for me. And that's kind of how that's what made me submit that first poem. Was it good? Again, maybe. Even for a 12-year-old, it was probably iffy. But looking back on it, it's just full cringe. Uh, but that kind of is what got me started. Of course, you take breaks now and then. And it's funny because this year I've published more than I have in a long time. Maybe it's just because of life and things like that, but um, I'm hoping to keep that momentum going with short stories and things. I have a few things coming out next month, which, so I'm looking forward to that. But it is something that I never thought I was going to be doing until I just had to kind of do it,
Nice. Mari?
So first, I do want to chime in on the ADHD train here. Yes, I feel like this is a great group of people with focus issues. But and now I am also going to seriously date myself after that MS-DOS comment because my very first poem was when I was a little girl and I was told, oh, you can write a poem for the school newsletter if you'd like to. So I worked very hard on it, and I used a manual typewriter, folks, in order to forget this wonderful computer stuff. Manual typewriter. And because I really didn't know how to type at the time, I had to type it out 3 times to get it right. Submitted it. My grandfather liked it. I feel that everyone else here would have some concerns about the fact that the entire poem was basically just about a clown falling down and falling down. Sad clown, down, down. It was perhaps not the most impressive work of poetry, but I got excited and they said, well, you could do it again. And I couldn't think of a rhyme. It was terrible. So a very kind teacher told me, well, poems don't have to rhyme. Showed me some non-rhyming poems, and I wrote an even worse poem that got published in the school yearbook. And that was just too much effort for everybody involved because, manual typewriters. So So years went by, and then in high school, I realized I did want to be a writer. So I did some sports writing for the local newspaper. I started sending out some terrible poems. I sent out my first submission to Poetry Magazine with that careful self-addressed stamped envelope. As I said, I am really dating myself, folks. Back in the days, yes, when you snail mailed out the manuscripts, you had to include a little envelope for it to get sent back to you. And Poetry never responded. That also began my great habit of submitting stuff to the great editor Ellen Datlow. And whenever I would submit something to her, she would leave that job. It was amazing. This went on for years, so which was quite discouraging. I did finally start getting some poems published under lit magazines, and then, like everyone here, depression, real life. Depression, real life. I wrote my first novel, which did get an agent, but when it made the rounds, did not actually get picked up. Depression, real life, depression, real life. I did a second stab at the whole writing thing where I did more gaming writing, nonfiction writing, some other stuff. Again, depression, real life, depression, real life. Finally came back for what I've called my third run at this, which really started in, I'd say, about 2007. Began doing a lot more science fiction and poetry and fantasy. Like others here, I'm going to agree with some of the comments in the sense that flash fiction, at least for me, is something that can be done relatively quickly. It gives me a sense of satisfaction. I can get it out. I can get an immediate response. When I have worked on novels, they have tended to be highly experimental and more difficult. I don't seem to work with traditional narrative structures that well in a long novel. So naturally, not to shock everybody here, but no one has rushed to pick these. Yes, let's get this let's get this extremely weird book out there. And to be fair, I also have not really tried very hard. So there's two sides to that. But I mention that because it sometimes takes me a very long time to write a short story. I have short stories that I have worked on for well over a decade. I have short stories that I have written in 1 or 2 days. I don't have a consistent pattern for that. It's just how it happens. My poetry novella took about technically 5 years, but I finished most of that writing in 6 weeks. It was like something I'd been picking at, and then in 6 weeks I went at it, finished it up, and got that published. So that's been kind of how. But even now, in what I call the third attempt, there's been ups and downs. I essentially stopped writing in 2023 for a number of reasons. So I'm crawling back in, and yeah, that's where I'm at now.
That's amazing. And so definitely the consensus is, right, we like the idea that it feels easier or quicker to write short stories and poetry. But when you talk, just to kind of piggyback or highlight the idea of flash fiction being easier to write, I write children's fiction. And whenever we talk about picture book authors, or you talk to picture book authors, like every year there's like 50 precious words. And for me, I'm an overwriter. So having to narrow things down into a couple hundred words is like not even a thought in my head. So it's really sounds like those are some of the different issues that we have to consider as authors and as writers and poets. So that leads into the next question of, what do you feel are some of the challenges or different challenges that you would face, not as just a poet and a creator of short form fiction, but in terms of publishing these types of stories, and what are the biggest challenges you could think of? Chyina, I'm going to start with you. Circle.
Okay, I think that for me, one of the biggest challenges is the fact that there are so many options. There's like this inundation of like, well, you can do this, or you can try this, or you can go there. And it can be overwhelming when you have too many options, you don't know which to choose. And I think, especially with poetry, I think I really got back into poetry a few years ago, where I challenged myself to write a poem every day for a month. I don't know why I did that to myself, but I did. It was terrible. I will never do that again. But I had no, like, I like reading poetry, but it had been a very long time since I tried to publish any poetry. And since the last time, all these new places cropped up, and so I wasn't sure which ones were legit, which ones. So I think that that can be very hard for even, writers who have been writing for a while. If you're trying a new form, especially, you're not really quite sure where to go. And so if you're not already familiar with that writing community, it's easy to get scammed or turn your work into like a supposed lit mag that's fake, or find an agent that actually isn't going to work for you, or maybe not be an agent at all, honestly. So you really have to do your homework, and you have to ask the right questions just to make sure everything's on the up and up. And I think that another challenge, especially for writers who love to write but are living in this economy, is that a lot of lit mags nowadays require a reading fee, or they'll have a tip jar, but the tip is mandatory and it's like $20. So it's not really a tip jar. But so if you don't have the discretionary income for that, your piece may be perfect for that current call for submission for that theme or whatever, but it's not going to get read because you just don't have the funds to spend, $25 on.
Mari wants to jump on in right
Yeah,
there. Go ahead.
I have an incredible amount of thoughts on this. Most of the lit mags that are charging submission fees are doing so because they are no longer getting the college funding that they used to have to run those scenes. So they have turned to submission fees. And here's where I'm going to try to border between advice, orders, whatever. If your focus is getting an academic job, earning an MFA, and obtaining a teaching position afterwards, it may be to your long-term benefit to consider with some of these zines paying the $3 to $5 fee. If it is more than that, chances are good that, as Chyina just said, this is a scam. And it may, in fact, harm you with some MFA programs and with obtaining a job in a lit track later. And one of the things I think we as poets are doing very poorly at, and I include myself here, is we are not talking enough about this. How falling for one of those scams can be yes, there's also the financial issue of can you even afford the $25 to $50 fee to start with, but I think a bigger problem is people will look at that and go, oh, yes, well, here's the publication credit I need to get into that MFA program and to get a teaching credit. But many MFA programs and later on English departments and PhD programs are like, well, that's not a real credit. That doesn't count. And in fact, it's a bad enough credit that we are going to take this other person who looks on the surface as if this person has fewer publishing credits. That's a problem. Having said that, since many of us I see are doing fantasy science fiction, unfortunately, I'm not too familiar with any type of romance poetry, but I can say with science fiction, fantasy poetry, genre poetry typically does not charge submission fees. Now, that does not always mean you're going to love the publishing experience, but you're not going to pay to submit to Uncanny, to Strange Horizons, to Radon, to Reckoning, to Interstellar Flight Press, to any of those publications. And so that's great. So that is, to a certain extent, the advantage of focusing on fantasy and science fiction poems. And there are lit mags out there that do not charge sub fees. You do have to look for them, but they do exist. So it's not like, oh, the only route to the literary mag publication is through sub fees. No, you can deal with Rattle, and they that came out a little bit long. They will respond. Yes, you are dealing with a lot, oftentimes very lengthy response times, but those paths can exist. Even if you do not have an MFA, even, or any of the so-called, oh, this is what I need. Maybe not. But please, if it's $25 or more, please don't submit. Please don't. There are better ways. So, even if you want that teaching position and that academic position, please think of other ways to get there. All right, I'm sorry. I will calm down.
No, you're fine. But also, Mari is right. Like the only time I could see someone paying that like $25, if maybe if it's a contest, the contests typically have higher fees because you are going to get money at the end if you win. But yes, you can find free submissions. Um, of course, and try to find the free ones first. But yeah, that can be an issue.
And on the contest also, I advise people to be a little careful because many of those contests with the $25 to $50 fees also have very lengthy exclusivity periods, so that you've done the contest, but you now can't publish that poem for 5 years. That kind of sucks. But you can't put it into a collection. You can't put it into a chapbook. You can probably quietly perform it someplace because nobody's going to track that down. But that is also something to pay very careful attention to, especially since, with this conference, we're looking at the indie side of publication, and you need to keep as many of your rights as possible. And a contest is, for many of them, is not always the ideal route to keeping your rights.
Right.
Not to say there are legitimate contests out there, but just read the fine print.
Read the fine print, right? It's our responsibility to do our due diligence wherever we go in whatever we write. So, Dawn, I'll have you chime in. Any challenges you want to add?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've found that is challenging is the process can be disheartening. You write something and of course you think it's a great piece, whatever the format tends to be, and you can submit it to tons and tons of markets and just not get a bite at all. And then sometimes, you get surprised, but so you can, like, I've had stories that have gone to so many markets and just rejection after rejection, and it wears on you. But I've also had pieces that, have gone out 30, 40 times and then finally find their home. And so that's a nice feeling. The other one that I have had as a personal challenge is that for a while I was writing a lot. We're talking 100-ish pieces a year, which is a lot, even in short fiction and poetry. And when you've got that many pieces, it starts becoming a second job just to do your submissions and to keep track of what's gone where, even with the help of websites that, track some of that for you. There's still just a lot of, okay, what's open? Can I send this story that I just got a rejection on back out? Or am I going to sit here and somehow have 50 pieces that I haven't submitted in a month because I've just been too busy to do that. So yeah, those are my two things is the process can wear you down, and also the amount of work can really cut into your writing time.
Adria?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Dawn with the rejections just wearing you down. Because you can even think you've picked the perfect fit and you're like, oh, this place is gonna love this one. I was so close on my last story, right? I got that personal R that was like, oh, we love this, whatever, and you're like, oh, but this one's you're really, and then they're like, form R, and you're just like, what? So that's awful. I have the opposite problem as Don though, because because I'm juggling, say, writing novels and editing novels with writing short stories and editing short stories that I don't always have enough pieces to kind of have out there. And so sometimes there's really long returns. I think it's gotten, that time for how long some of these markets are holding things is longer and longer and longer. So even places that used to be a few days, a few weeks are now many weeks, a couple months, maybe longer. And if there are no SimSub or simultaneous submission, which means I can't submit it at the same time to more than one market, then I have to, if I want to keep things moving along, and one of my things is I do kind of see it as a numbers game, because like as I said, even when I think it's like the perfect fit, sometimes I'm right. I have stories that like landed exactly where I sent them. And sometimes I'm so wrong, and it's the dozens of short of rejections before it finds a home or is still looking for a home. And so I end up with like not enough things to send out so that I am kind of continually submitting. So I have kind of the opposite problem as of Dawn in that case. So those would be, again, the challenges would be the wearing down and the submission Tetris with not having enough stories, I guess, in my case.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely when you see those calls uh, for it, you're like, oh, I have the perfect idea. And then sometimes there's so many calls and there's so many similarities that you're kind of like, do I send them to all these places? If I wait, and luckily, I guess with novels, everything takes forever and a day in publishing. So I guess we've kind of gotten used to that. And if there's a way for us to have shorter ones, then this is definitely an outlet for it. But amazing. A lot of different types of challenges that we can see across all writers and forms of writing, but it sounds like there are some very unique challenges as well. But with that, the next question I kind of want to pose moves us into more of the business side of how do we find these. So with that, like, how do you find either the right agents or publishers? Like, do you have a specific agent who will just represent poetry and is looking specifically for that? Because when I'm looking at wish lists, I don't see that very often. So how do we even go about finding the right people to connect with and publications for us to go to? So Chyina, I'm going to start with you again.
Oh, I feel so called out.
Well, I think
So,
like I think of you as an editor. Like
well,
I
yeah.
have an
So,
editor lens in my head.
well, thank you. That's mainly what I do. But so I think that I am not agented. So everything I do is, I do all the like grinding and looking and checking and making sure things are legit. Um, and so this is something I tell my clients too when they're writing, especially if they're writing novels. Um, don't just send out your entire work to some rando, right? Because I've had my work stolen like that, with a supposed critique partner actually, and then like a few months later, like they were like, pitching my exact, like it was weird. But anywho, sorry, squirrel moment.
It's a
Anywho.
different. That's another panel altogether.
But you check what they're about. So, you don't just go based off getting that random spammy email they might send you or someone reaching like DMing you. There are, of course, agents and publishers like who might do that, especially if it's like at a pitch event or something like that. But that's, you want to be wary of that. So you as a writer, you have to do your research. Check writers beware, ask your writing community. WriteHive is a great place. There are, hundreds of people active every single day in the server. Ask somebody, hey, do you know this person? Hey, do you know that person? What's your experience? I have for our writer, like the Women of Color Writer Circle, we have an entire like spreadsheet of, okay, good agents we would avoid, lit agencies we would, avoid because it's important. And a lot of writing communities have that. You just have to ask, right? So don't be afraid to ask because you don't know what you don't know, but you also don't want to be afraid to ask because that's how, you can get in trouble. So agents and things, a lot of them have their own website. So check to make sure they actually read the genre you're writing in, especially if you're writing in genre, especially genre poetry. Not everybody wants genre poetry. So if somebody just says they want poetry and you thinking, oh, this is great, but no, they don't actually want your science fiction or fantasy poetry and they want to sound like they want something like Shakespeare, that's not your fit, right? So you have to be mindful of that. Also check the same values and standard, like check to make sure they have the same values and standards. I was talking about this on another panel. Like most of us here are staunchly against AI unless it's being used as, some sort of accessibility aid for screen readers or something like that. But if your agent is over here saying, or the agent you want to submit to saying, oh, I love the idea of AI, or buy these AI published book, like that's probably not the person you want to send your work to, honestly. So those are things to be mindful of. So check places like, if you're not agented and you don't want to be an agented writer and you just want to kind of submit, check those places like Duotrope submission like go and do the work. It is a lot of work at first, but then you kind of get into your groove and you kind of understand where to go. Um, and it gets easier as time goes on because now you know what to look for.
Yeah, so in my experience, most agents don't have much to do with the short fiction or the poetry individual submissions. So if you've just got, a handful of stories, a handful of poems, and you're sending them out individually or with poetry, some markets will accept like 3 to 5 that they'll look at on a submission. Agents, in my experience, haven't have they don't have the interest or the time for that sort of thing. Most of the people I know who have dealt with agents when it comes to either short fiction or poetry has been when they've had a collection or a chapbook. And then they might have an agent that will help them shop that around. But for the most part, when you're looking for markets, you're kind of doing it on your own. And, like Chyina has said, you have to watch out for the ones that are either not good opportunities, scam or otherwise. You have to look out for the ones where you might not want your stuff associated with it, whether that's because of AI or because of other policies that they have. Or I have certainly encountered markets that have stated values that are way off from my own personal values. And I'm just like, no, I'm not sending to you because I don't trust them to do the right thing. Um, and so a lot of it really to find the right market is just sort of, talk to other people who are in the same community with you, who are writing the same sort of stuff, or even some people who aren't necessarily writing exactly what you write, but are at least sort of in the trenches, as it were, doing the work and being familiar with the publishing ecosystem. The other recommendation that a lot of magazines will even suggest is read the magazines that you're interested in submitting to. And that can be challenging, again, financially, if they are not publishing things that you can read for free. But a lot of really great places have stuff online that you can read. Strange Horizons, they have their poetry. I believe they also have their short stories online. So you can read and see what they're buying and say, oh, this is a good fit or this isn't a good fit.
I agree. The people I know who have like short stories, and do have agents, their agents are for their novels and they are still out there doing all their short stories. Sometimes connections will be made. This is my friend who does a thing. I'm telling kind of her story here, but yeah, I mean, she's had where her agent had a connection to an anthology that was coming out, and she said, "Would you want to write something?" But other than making the connection, it's not usually like Don said, like individual things. It's more of a collection or something. I'm not agented, so I am definitely doing it all on my own. And I do use online portals that help with the finding who's open and where like a good genre match or a good word count matches. So I think Submission Grinder has been mentioned here, Duotrope's been mentioned, Chill Subs also. Some of those have fees to access the website and some of them don't. And so you have to, of course, again, I anytime you have a barrier to entry that is financial, that may or may not work out for you. And some people really love a format of a certain website, so there was something to be said for that. Um, I feel like I've gone completely down a different path than
No, I think you're still on there on the idea of finding the right
yeah,
connection.
yeah. And then uh I did want to say, as Don said, the reading the work is really helpful. And so I do have some subscriptions to magazines that I really enjoy as a person. So that's something to be said for that. And obviously, if I enjoy them, that probably is a better match, anyways, for my stories. Though a lot of times those aren't the places I'll always get my stories accepted. But I keep trying. Even some of the literary places. So I always think of Smoke Long Quarterly. Like I have the place I throw it if it if it fits. So Smirklawn Quarterly only accepts stories under 1,000 words. They're more literary bent. Um, I think they would say they don't take genre, but if you read their website, th- they're really gray, wide gray line there. They're just trying to find the right place based on words. Oh, and Clark's World's the other place I throw things because they like only over. I don't even remember what their lower limit is. I actually very rarely write things for in the Clark's World word count. So,
I
so
think
I always have.
their oh sorry, I think their minimum is like 1,000. Neil Clark does not like flash fiction. He's told
Neil will
many
go
people
on
that.
and on and on if you let him about his dislike for flash fiction.
Well, then I
Yes.
send the flash to Smoke Long and the non-flash to Clark's World, and someday maybe Neil will write some like something I wrote. Um, And not to make their slush piles huge or anything, but I think that having like a place that I start, like I know I always send my story first here, and they will probably be rejected because I have yet to place something at either of those locations. But it's like kind of like ripping the Band-Aid off.
Right.
And then after that, I can use the various tools that are online to help me find homes.
Mari, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to go quickly back to the agent thing. There
Mhm.
are currently exactly 3 agents in the entire United States who are representing genre short story collections. And I'm going to be really blunt and harsh here. If you are not fairly well published in the major genre zines, they're going to ghost you.
Hmm.
That for your short story collection, not necessarily for your novel. That is an entire. They may be very, very open for novels, and the reason for this is simple. Most of the New York Five big publishers are not doing a lot of short story collections right now. The small presses are doing short story collections, but they usually aren't providing huge advances. So for the majority of genre agents, this isn't really what they're looking to do. In terms of poetry, there are people that do poetry, not genre poetry. So there are 3 agents out there right now that are doing poetry collections. And this is all on the literary side for something like Tin House or I'm blanking, but the more the more literary books. So that does exist, but again, it's those 3 agents. And so, and I will, agents in general, if it's just a single short story or just a poem, unless you are Stephen King and you're sending everything through an agent, I honestly don't know. And I'm not even sure if Stephen King does this, to be honest. I think the rest of us all send our short stories directly. And includes New York Times bestsellers. Like Brandon Sanderson handles his own short stories. He does not send those through an agent. So so that's on the agency side. In terms of how I find a publication, when I finish a story, I take a look at the word count and I take a look at the subject matter, and I base it on what is the publication paying, what is the response time. In my particular case, have I had any sort of negative interaction with one of the editors or one of the others? For the most part, that's no. But just in case, I'll take a look and say, hey, has there been a particular problem? Okay, I don't want to submit there. So I will often send to Clark's World first. And then start going down the list from there. The other thing that I have to look at these days, which is an unfortunate new happening because of AI, is I have to look and see, is that publication open for submissions? Back in the day, and I mean back 5 years ago, this was not a problem. But now publications are so overwhelmed with bad AI submissions that the way they've been dealing with it is to be only open for a couple of weeks at a time. Which is incredibly frustrating. And unfortunately, the only way to get around that, and this doesn't always work, is to be previously published in that publication. But even in that case, like I'm going to go ahead and name names here, Three Low Burning Eye, I can't submit to them outside of those particular publication submission periods. And I've been published by them. They don't care. This is how they have to do it. And it's in order to deal with it's the only way they can handle the incoming slush, which is a problem for them. So that has somewhat changed my policy in the sense that if I have something that I think is a good fit for Uncanny, I have to wait and then just say, well, okay, what are my chances? Uncanny's published me before. The editors seem to like me. But on the other hand, wow, is that a very competitive market and very difficult to get into? And wow, do they reject my stuff? So I have to make some adjustments. So yeah, it is an individual piece, but also looking at response times, pay rate, and do I want to be in that zine? There's a cases where I've looked at it and gone, I don't want to deal with it. How difficult is the submission process? If you give me a form that has way too many things to fill out, I'm not sure I want to deal with your zine. Now, I am in the position where I can probably, ignore some zines, but at the same time, that is something that will come up with, no, if you make me go through this many hoops rather than just using Submittable or the Moshka system, I'm going to be a little bit more hostile. So,
So kind of building on the same conversation, what do you think these, like you've named, all of you have named a lot of different tools that people can go to find these opportunities, trying to follow these organizations and these publications for their calls for submissions. What do you think agents and publishers are looking for in poetry and in the poems and the short stories that they're selecting? So Dawn, I'm going to start with you here. What do you think they're looking for with all of these things?
So the good news about that is that most good markets will tell you in their submission guidelines. So, read their guidelines. If they say, for example, as I know that Neil Clark does with Clarkesworld, do not send me a zombie story. I do not send him a zombie story because he is not interested in that. So I know it's not going to be a good fit. He's going to reject that thing as fast as he can. But, sometimes market guidelines can be a little bit more nebulous. They can say, oh, we want beautiful language and stunning imagery. And that is much more of a judgment call. So there are some markets where you can go, okay, this story is not a good fit for this market because it has a thing that they explicitly don't want. When it's more nebulous, you kind of have to guess. And again, that's where reading some of their published things can be useful. Sometimes with the bigger markets, they might end up having some sort of representation in a year's best of. So, for example, if you're interested in horror writing in particular, Ellen Datlow's yearly horror anthology that's made of previously published stuff, you can grab a copy of that, probably relatively inexpensive for the ebook, and see what the markets that these stories were published in seem to be publishing based on those stories. So yeah, I think that's my main tip is read guidelines. And if you can read the stories that they've published, that's good too.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot to add to that. As I said, I recommend the places where you can sort. It's very important to go with word counts. So we just had a whole thing where I was like, I can't remember what length ones I sent to Clarkesworld, and everyone said, oh, well, it's definitely not below 1,000, right? So always make sure within the word count. Like, don't submit something. They're not going to accept it if they have these hard word limits, right? And some people write, some markets are looking for a specific demographic. So like Other Side, and there's another one that just came out, and they're very specifically looking for LGBTQIA 2S people. And so, if you're not a member of that community, it's don't add to the slush pile and submit there, that sort of thing. So always making sure that I am a member of the community that if they have restrictions on that. There's plenty of markets that are Canadians only because they get grants from Canada, and my connection to Canada is somewhat tenuous. So I'm an American living in the US. I have a spouse who's Canadian and like a great grandmother who is Canadian, but like that's not, that doesn't make me Canadian. So that sort of thing. So that's really what I mostly do. It's the whole submission Tetris. Is my word count right? Is it already submitted somewhere else? And do they accept simultaneous submissions? And then sometimes most places only seem to take one story at a time, though some places will take up to some number, and that's with poetry is a little more frequent than with short stories. Sometimes flash stories you can also group together for a few markets, and just making sure that I'm always following the guidelines. But I do keep my own separate spreadsheet to track what's submitted and use an online tracker because I need to, or I'm gonna make a mistake. So I really rely heavily on those tools.
I agree with Don and Adria. Don't just read what their guidelines are, actually follow them. That's the important part. Like you follow the guidelines. I'm a reader. I've been a reader for multiple magazines, and I'm a reader for one. And it was for last year we had a call for submissions, and the word count limit was 6,000 words. And someone submitted like 20,000 word story. And I'm just like, I'm not reading this because you're not gonna get, there's no point in me reading it. It's probably a really great story, but why would I read it if I know it's not gonna make it through to the editor because they have a hard cutoff of 6K words, and you're over here sending more than triple that. Um, so actually follow the guidelines. There are certain markets where maybe the first 7 days of the month, they're open to a specific community. And then the rest of the, they're open to everyone else. So submit when you know you're supposed to. So if the market's calling for neurodivergent writers in the first 7 days and you are neurotypical, don't submit using that neurodivergent, tag or something like that. You're not being honest for one, but also you're not following their guidelines. So even if you're think to yourself, oh, I have this great story, be considerate of that. So for like the Women of Color Writer Circle, our anthology, it's of course we love our allies, but it's for women of color. And I can't even tell you out of the about 100 of submissions we got, almost 60 of those were from either men or women who weren't of color. And I noticed that various sites that would post about it weren't even including that was necessary to submit. And so you have to be mindful of that too. If you're going on an aggregate site, like Authors Publish or something like that, go back to the original site to make sure you're following the guidelines. Because if there is a call for something and you think, oh, your story will work great, it might be a great story, but you might not be following the actual submission guidelines of the actual market. So that's something to consider.
And of all those considerations, I would say word count is probably the most important because the majority of the zines and the anthologies have a set financial limit. They haven't like pulled that word count out of thin air. They've said, this is what we're paying per word. This is the amount of money we have. Okay, this is what we can do. Having said that, I'm also on the do not self-reject. If you think they're, and if you have something that's like, oh, wow, this is an absolute perfect fit for this call, but the call says it has to be 5,000 words, and I have 5,200 words. Query, send out an email, say, I'm a little over the word count. Is this going to be a problem? It might work. It might not. They might say no, absolute flat out, absolute no. But if you send it without asking, I guarantee it's going to be a no. If you take the 5 minutes to write an email asking, maybe. I mean, I really don't want to speak for editors here because and say, yes, they're definitely going to do it, but at least do the asking. Having also said that, as somebody with, light brown, blonde hair and pale skin, We have plenty of opportunities, folks. You do not need to submit to the POC. I hear you, China. It's like there's, if a anthology fit does or a zine fit doesn't fit you, it's fine. There are other places where you can publish that story, save everybody and yourself time, and just move on. So
Awesome. Yeah. So it's definitely, just like with anything else, it's like read the rules, read the submissions, and be conscientious of that. And so the fact that if, maybe these publications don't want to take somebody who can't follow the basic rules, and it's like it's an amazing piece, but if you feel like you're so entitled to that we have to read it, then we don't want you. We don't want you here. Right? But like along these same lines of kind of finishing off the publication piece of it, what do you guys think are maybe are there any unconventional places? I think Adria, I'm going to start you on this one because you were mentioning translations on it. So it's like I had it tagged for unconventional places to consider publishing your poetry and your short stories.
Oh, for sure. So, I don't know that's so unconventional, but like I said, my published poetry currently are I did a poem a day for National Poetry Writing Month with a group of poets, and I'm in that group as a reader because I just love poetry. Um, but I played along because it was fun, and then I just put them on my own website. So there's always that. And I because for me, I don't really consider myself a poet, so I didn't think about, sending them out anywhere after that. One of my first publications was also translated into Spanish. Now that was because I did send it to a location that was publishing in both English and Spanish. And they were taking both English and Spanish language submissions and then translating across. And that was a really wonderful experience. I really liked that. And you can find locations that take, your story and will translate it. And I forgot to call up the website, but there's a couple websites that will list places that you could possibly send to for other countries that you could send like maybe a reprint or something because it would be translated. So you're always watching those publication rights, right? So if you some places take first English rights, and some places will take first other language rights, and whether it's world or which is more often world now that we live in a more connected environment, right? When it was just being published and distributed on American newsstands, then it was just really US rights that they were doing. And when you sent it off to some place in Europe, they were getting European rights. And novels, I think, still work like that, but short stories less and less, because if they get published on the internet, I think it's generally world rights. But anyways, that's getting in, I think, a little deep. Um, but yeah, translation, finding places that will do translation, or sometimes, and I'm not this big, but I do again, I'm telling a friend's story. They had a story and they got contacted by somebody who wanted to translate it into Chinese and then publish it in a Chinese magazine, and this was legitimate. So I think this is where it does get a little difficult, though, as China's talked about. Spam and scam types of situations. And this is a ripe place for those. So you do have to be careful if you're being contacted by somebody for a publication that is going into translation, that it is legitimate. So do your due diligence on that. But it is possible if you have like just a story that really, strikes somebody or vibes with somebody and they think it's a great fit for some local market of theirs in a country where you're maybe not published or your story isn't published. Oh, and then audio. I've had a couple things go into audio, and that's also, I think, not as commonly thought of. There in horror, I think it's a lot more common. Because I can think of several horror podcasts that take short stories off the top of my head. And then you have the Podcastle, Cast of Wonders,
Pseudopod.
Pseudo, but thank you. I was like, I had all four, and then I was like, wait, I can think of one of. So they're all by the same overarching company, and then it's like one's science fiction, one's fantasy, one's horror, one's whatever. So they're really common as well. But like, don't dismiss audio markets because those are another good market. You just have to double check if they also are going to print it, then that's probably taking some print rights too. So you always have to make sure you're balancing that. But I think those are some not as commonly thought of places that can be really wonderful for submitting to.
I've got two thoughts on that. One on the translation. I have found that that is where I've been approached after a publication is there will be people that come and say, can we do translation rights? And it has varied tremendously, not so much from translator to translator, but from country to country. So you do have to check, is this a legitimate place, going and talking to people. Second, is this going to be a Polish translation? Because that is going to end up, and I did not know this, but, talk to people about, okay, which countries are going to be easier to deal with. Poland, for a long list of reasons that never made sense to me, is a little bit more difficult for translation and reprint rights. But that is a good source. And what I liked about that is that's not really something I had to do. I wasn't proactive with it. It does not come often, in my experience at least, but maybe once every couple of years, and it's like, oh, this is another cool little thing that came out. But my cautionary note here is on the audio rights, which is if you are doing any sort of reading on YouTube, at a convention or whatever, and you're like, oh, well, here's a brand new poem or a brand new short story that I've just written and I want to share with the world. YouTube is probably not the best place for that. And not for where the reasons you might be thinking. It's because that you've just done a first worldwide publication and you've just blown those rights. So you need to be a little bit cautious. I noticed this happen, and I'm bringing this up because it literally happened in a virtual panel that I was on yesterday, where somebody read his original poem on a recorded panel, and he's just lost the original rights to that, which poetry may not pay much, but that poem was good enough that it could have had a first world publication for $40 to $50 to $100. And so short fiction is going to pay more. So again, be cautious there. I know people are very excited. Where you can do, if you want to perform the poem, is perform the poem at a local event, at a convention, at places like that where nobody is recording. And then by all means, go ahead, read your poem, read your short story, get the feedback, find out about it, but just make sure that it's not on the internet where you've just lost your first publication rights, which can be a bit of a problem. And editors can find this, and they will if they need to. Oh, and one other thought on that one, because we mentioned the year's best and everything, be also cautious that your audio production comes out, if you have one, is not done until the year of print publication. Because what has sometimes happened is people are like, oh, well, I have this poem forthcoming in Uncanny in March. It's November. I will read this poem on YouTube. Well, you've now screwed yourself in two different ways, because Uncanny is like, wait a minute, we had exclusive. But also for year's best anthologies and for awards, that all has to be within the specific calendar year. Well, you just published in November, even though the next publication isn't until when people would actually see it is until March. So you've just, don't do that. So I feel like I'm lecturing too much, but these are all little pitfalls that can cost you money or create problems or whatever that I did not know about when I was starting out. So I'm trying to issue warnings on don't learn from mistakes. Have a much better career is what I want out of for everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Mari. Dawn, unconventional places to consider?
So one that is sort of interesting, but I've seen it for at least a couple of places, is every once in a while you can get your stuff published on transit. They will sometimes on the buses, I'm in the Seattle area, and they will sometimes do a call for poets to send in poetry that will be then published on the buses. And as best as I know, it pays. I also know somebody, I believe, in Toronto who's had his poetry published on the subway system there. So, look at that in your local area, or even in an area you don't live in, because sometimes those are open to whoever. But I think that's the most unusual one that I've seen is, get stuff on a bus, get stuff on a train. Seems pretty cool to me.
Yeah. Chyina, any ads?
I think everyone pretty much covered it. Of course, looking for anthologies, a lot of burgeoning anthologists are using Kickstarter now, which is interesting. So that's something, to take into consideration. Um, People, of course, are publishing a lot on social media, but of course, you have to be wary of that. Like, don't publish your best stuff on social media. I mean, I know everyone wants to be the next Rupi Picard, but like, save that for like your random, 2 a.m. haikus, not the ones you want to make money off of, for all the reasons that Mari mentioned. And an unusual one that came to mind was my local airport. I'm in Ohio. The CAK airport has a little print a story. So instead of scrolling on your phone while you're waiting for your plane, you can like go and just say, "Oh, what kind of stories do you like?" And then you pick a genre and you hit print and it'll just print off a random story. So that's something to consider. Um, the costs for that, at least here, aren't very often. But, if you can get into that, that's one random way. And how many people can say, "Oh, I'm in a story vending machine at the airport." Like, so something to consider.
That's amazing. That's the most interesting thing I've heard. Having a story vending machine sounds absolutely fascinating, and really cool to look into. Okay, well, we're hitting our time, so last question for the panel, and you've all kind of like given so much incredible information and great tidbits for everyone who's watching. So the last question is, what do you wish you knew at the beginning of your publishing journey? So it's always that quintessential advice question. So Mari had a lot of advice for us. I'm going to have you start this one, Mari. So tell us, what do you think people should have known? What do you wish you knew at the beginning of your journey that you want to share?
That it was not going to be a straight path. I did not know that, even though I had, I thought I kind of did, but I really did not realize it would not be a straight path. I also can say I'm old enough to say that I did not foresee the internet, and it would have been, I had no idea that was coming. I have no idea those changes were being made. So, yeah, I don't know that that's necessarily, I didn't foresee the internet is helpful for anybody starting their journey now, but I will say that that means you don't necessarily know what's coming. I also did not foresee this AI trend, or the awful AI stuff. So be open to the fact that this can be a very difficult environment and situation to predict.
I really wish that I would have known how to handle rejection and not take it as a personal assault. Um, Like one thing I've learned kind of just as a writer, but also kind of as a reader for lit mags, is that sometimes your writing may be really good and the readers may actually like it. They might love your submission, but sometimes there's just not room. And there are tons of other little reasons why you may get that rejection to your email. And sometimes it has to do with what the mag is looking for or how much editing they can handle. Like if you can't spell and you knew that before, like going in and you refuse to use spell check, they might not have the room to like do all of that. So you have to be considerate of that. And also, like challenging yourself to get rejected. Like this year, I've made it my rejection, like chasing rejection year. And like I said, I'm pushing things out more for submission, but that also means I'm getting more yeses and more nos. So you have to kind of take what I like to say, take the crickets with the straights. So you have to kind of be like, okay, this sucks, but and there are publications out there who may um I can't Start J Publishing. They do a lot with African American fiction and nonfiction, and they have a 24-hour response time. Within 24 hours, you will have like whether it's a yes or a no, and it's always personalized. That kind of helped me too, like saying, okay, even if it's a no, having a little bit of feedback, and you might not always get that. You might get a form rejection, but you also have to know sometimes sometimes you're just not a good fit, and that's okay. So writers, out there, it's okay to get rejected. You're gonna get rejected. But you can do something fun. I have a friend who she would print out her rejection letters and like decoupage them to chairs and like so she could sit on the edit. It's like, so do something fun. Like, I don't know, make a wedding dress out, whatever. Just like take the rejection and keep it moving. Don't let one rejection or two or 10 or a dozen rejections keep you, in fear of pushing out that next story or that next poem.
So I kind of wish I had a plan when I started, which isn't to say like you have to be totally organized in a plan, but as Marie said, there are things that she didn't know when she started that caused a loss of rights, a loss of income, or whatnot. And so whatever your like plan is overall, right? I wanted to be published and I wanted to earn some money, ideally earn enough money I could pay for writing classes or whatever. But instead I just sort of threw stuff out and didn't have any plan. And over time I've come to well, my first place I send something is this place and this is my plan, and I made my little goals of there's like a saying of, it's what's most important to you. There's money, there's shiny, and there's turnaround. And shiny is like more nebulous. It's those places that I read their stories because I love them so much and I just want to be in there, right? So that's shiny to me. And they may or may not pay as much, or they might have shorter, longer turnaround times, right? So they might fit into the jumble of choices in a little bit different way than just being like, I always start at 10 cents a word and go straight down, But like, I wish I'd thought to even have a plan of starting at 10 cents a word and going straight down, or, or whatever it was pro when I started, I think it was 8. But I wish I'd, rather than just throwing stuff out there, like stopped a moment and been like, okay, I would like to play stories in this way because it's important to me. Right. And I think that also goes a little bit with Dawn's earlier comment about like making sure I wasn't submitting to places that I didn't agree with their AI policy or some other something that was going on, to make sure I'm always like, because that is important to me, right? Like to make sure that my personal ethics are also not being compromised in some way. So that's what I wish I'd sort of known when I started, was to think a minute before just jumping in.
First, I have to say that I love the idea of decoupaging the rejection letters, but I think I want to print mine out and make a piñata, put some good candy in there, and then I can just take a baseball bat to that piñata. It'll be so much fun. But I think the thing that I wish that I had known is that it's more like a marathon than a sprint, because there were certainly times where I was really pushing myself to just be like, okay, all the stories have to be out all the time and just go, go, go. And I burned myself out. And, at this point, I'm not writing as much as I was for a while, because I burned out on that. And I'm not submitting or publishing as much as I used to, simply because I burned out on that. So if you want to do this for the long haul, it's important to remember that you don't have to do it all right now. You can take time and you don't have to rush. And yes, there are sometimes opportunities that you want to go for that will require you to do that, but not everything has to be an emergency on fire. You can just, if you really, really want to write a thing for a very specific market and you get it done, cool. If you don't get it done, there are other places you can send it later. And honestly, I've been doing this for a while, and anthology themes, they recur. So you might write a piece for an anthology, it doesn't get picked up for the one that you were hoping for. Hang on to that story, revise it maybe later on once you've gotten more skilled as a writer. And then you'll see that same topic coming around and you'll say, I already have this one written.
Great, 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 great advice for everyone. So it's no, don't self-reject, don't do all of this. Just have a plan and just develop a tough skin and an armor. Find a way to laugh off the rejections. Is definitely that consensus. I think I like the piñata idea now. So we're gonna all have these like rejections, and when you do, you have to like post it so we can see a video of you just going at it. Well, this has been an absolute delight, you guys. I think we've got a lot of great information out there for all the new budding poets and short form writers out there. And before we kind of close off, I want to give each of you an opportunity to give us your socials, give us your links. How can our viewers and watchers connect with you in the long term? So Mari, I'm going to start with you here.
The easiest is probably Mari Ness at Blue Sky. I do also have a web page that I really only update that with either, hey, here's publication news, or hey, here's another rant about accessibility at conventions. So if you, but I do have the web page, and I do try to do something with that. I also have a Patreon, which again I do not update as much as I should. Also under Mari Ness. The Patreon does have a fairly decent archive of poems you can't find anyplace else, if that's of any interest. But really, the best place right now to follow what's going on with me is Blue Sky, and the links that are there.
Perfect. Chyina?
I'm also on Blue Sky. It's powelleditorial.org because that's kind of my website. So that's also where you can find me, powelleditorial.org. You can find me on Discord. My DMs are open. Those are like the main places you can find me. Also, if you go to my website and the little chat box comes up, I don't do AI. So if you see a little message that says, hey, how can I help you? That's really just me. Feel free to talk. And if you see that it's closed, it's because I'm asleep. So like I'm in Eastern time, so don't, expect me to chat with you at 2 a.m. because it's not gonna happen. But but aside from that, Blue Sky, I have an Instagram. I very rarely use it. To be honest, I will, but yeah, Blue Sky. I have a Ko-fi account which I publish some things on. Substack, I publish a few things on Substack as well. But I'm very open. Like I said, I'm always on Discord, so you can always just DM me here.
Adria?
So the place to find links to all my socials and all my stories is adriabailton.com. So it's just my first last name.com. I am also on Blue Sky, and that is the adriabailton.com because you can get the little, that's the way they verify you on Blue Sky, is if it's, I think the website, much like Chyina said. And then I've been posting pretty frequently on Instagram lately, but I have to say I'm not very good at handling more than one social media at a time. So like be one place or another. On Blue Sky, you'll see me suggest short stories most of the times, though I like miss either because of big life stuff or actually big life stuff. Like it's always something related to big life stuff. So yeah, and I'm here on Discord. It's most of the places I am at Adria Bailton, my first last name, or you stick the .com on because it's like Blue Sky. Here I'm not, but you can always just find me. I mean, my name is in the like chat as my name, and yeah, feel free to DM and chat and find little places. I actually really like Discord. It's one of my favorite places to hang out with other writers.
And Dawn.
I am at historythatneverwas.com for my website. It doesn't use my name, but History That Never Was. And then on Blue Sky and Instagram, I am History Never Was because there was a character limit. I'm more active on Blue Sky than on Instagram, like many. And I also have a newsletter, a Patreon. I think I still have a Ko-fi. Those are all on my website. So you can find out what else I'm doing. My newsletter is once a month.
Great. Well, thank you guys all so much. Like I said, this has been so insightful. I think all of our viewers, and whether you're watching it live or you're watching it on a recording after the fact, you're going to find so much useful information in this particular panel, and then things that you'd never even considered when you're on this publishing journey. So make sure, I hope you guys have all enjoyed it. Make sure that you check out the chat boards, check out the discussions, look at the schedules to see what's coming up next, and then maybe just tag us if you want to watch it again later on, and make sure we hear all your success stories in the future. So it has been a delight. Thank you guys all so much, and we are done. Hope you enjoy the rest of the con.